Hello, my name is Joseph Andrews, and this video is titled Race Relations and Police Violence. Police officers have one of the most difficult jobs in America, and the physical demands and long hours can be a cause for stress. Being a public servant means that your actions are being scrutinized by the community you serve and the officials appointed over you. In recent years, the police have come under fire for their use of force, and with almost all of society equipped with a cell phone camera, videos are the new weapon against them. Probably the most famous video of police misconduct is that of the beating of Rodney King by the officers of the Los Angeles Police Department's Foothill Division. I grew up in Los Angeles, and my family moved into the area patrolled by Foothill Police when I was 11 years old. And I was warned by the neighborhood kids not to be out after curfew. Foothill cops were brutal and had a reputation of turning violent at the slightest hint of insubordination. And I soon found out my neighbor was an officer with the Foothill Division. I discovered this fact when I was riding my skateboard in front of his house and was suddenly struck by a forearm that launched me into the street. In a drunken voice, he said I was disturbing the peace and I would get my skateboard back in a week. But he warned me if I did it again, he would keep it for good. Therefore, I wasn't the least bit surprised when I saw the video and heard it was the officers of Foothill Division. I would soon find out that my problems with my neighbor were minor compared to the stories I would hear at my new school from the children being brought by bus from South Central and Watts. Apparently, when it came to race, it didn't matter what division the officers came from, and it was the entire Los Angeles Police Department that had the potential to become violent when dealing with blacks. Soon after school started, the children on the bus began to complain about the conditions and the long commutes in LA morning traffic on old school buses that often broke down while en route. The complaints soon turned to riots, and at the age of 12, I witnessed the carnage that occurs when blacks decide to turn violent in a white suburban junior high school. The police showed no mercy, and their brutality was not deterred by the fact that most of the rioters were children, but probably intensified because they were black. Since that morning on the schoolyard, I have heard that the race relations and violence from the Los Angeles police has gotten worse. Media reports about police abuse against blacks are the lead stories and headlines, and videos are showing up across the country. The problem is not limited to Los Angeles, and police brutality against people of color is a nationwide epidemic. It is important to discuss the underlying problem that police violence may be founded on, and at its core, its problem seems to derive from racism. Racism and discrimination, according to Marger. Racism is an ideology or belief system designed to justify and rationalize racial and ethnic inequality. And discrimination, most basically, is behavior aimed at denying members of particular ethnic groups equal access to societal rewards. The racism goes back to the period of slavery in America. The various laws, practices, and customs of the time regarding slaves resulted in the adaptation of white supremacy ideology. This factor was later reinforced by the 1857 Supreme Court ruling in Dred Scott versus Sanford, which held that blacks had no rights that whites were obligated to honor. There were 2,060 blacks lynched in the United States between 1882 and 1903. And according to Fegan, police were implicated in the 6,000 lynchings of black men and women that were recorded between the 1870s and the 1960s. It was also during the decades following the Civil War that high rates of black imprisonment became evident. The history of police violence against blacks can be traced back to the end of the Civil War, when private and police violence were used to create and maintain the system of enforced segregation that resulted from white fears of the newly freed blacks, and cites the historical role of white police officers as the principal agents of violent domination of black Americans, particularly through the Jim Crow era after emancipation. Blacks were no longer protected by their status as slaves. That is because slaves were considered the property of the slave owner and were capital earning assets. It made poor business sense for a slave owner to destroy or greatly damage his own assets. For these reasons, there were relatively few lynchings, public executions, or imprisonment of blacks prior to the Civil War. However, after slavery, they were no longer protected by these absurd statuses. Blacks were vulnerable to extreme levels of physical violence as the rate of lynchings and other types of abuses against blacks increased. Police brutality against black males, according to Walker, police brutality is defined as the use of excessive physical force or verbal assault and psychological intimidation. Blacks are more likely to be the victims of police brutality. A growing body of research related to police brutality has revealed that blacks are more likely than whites to make complaints regarding police brutality, to be stopped while operating a motor vehicle, which has been referred to as driving while black, and to underreport how often they are stopped. The more common term we know as racial profiling is used to describe the practice of targeting or stopping an individual based primarily on race or ethnicity, rather than on reasonable suspicion or probable cause. Police officers view black males as potential culprits, and this could lead to acts of brutality. Black people in general, and black males in particular, are unjustly profiled as aggressive and criminal, and police are more likely to view black men as a threat, which justifies the disproportionate use of deadly force. Therefore, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that police officers' decisions to act aggressively may be influenced by race. Minorities, particularly blacks, are disproportionately or overrepresented at every stage of the nation's criminal justice system, from detainment to incarceration. Blacks are arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and incarcerated at rates disproportionate to their percentage of the population, and in comparison to whites. Blacks comprise 12.3% of the U.S. population, yet represent 40% of the country's incarcerated population. Racial and ethnic minorities make up 64% of persons in prison, according to the U.S. Bureau of Justice statistics from 2001. And based on current first-time incarceration rates, black males have a 32% chance of being incarcerated during their lifetime, compared to 17% of Hispanic males and 5.9% of white males. Furthermore, blacks are also the target of inappropriate street stops, insulting language, excessive force, and police corruption. For each type of misconduct, blacks are the most likely to harbor negative views. Whites are the least likely, and Hispanics fall somewhere in between. For example, only 16% of whites believe that police excessively stop people on the streets without good reason within their city, compared to 54% of blacks and 38% of Hispanics. Neighborhood, socioeconomic conditions, and racial composition have been found to influence residents' attitudes and interactions with the police, with disadvantaged and minority communities having worse relations with the police than middle class and white communities. There is some evidence that neighborhood crime conditions have some influence on residents' satisfaction with the police. There are also reasons to expect that local crime conditions may be associated with real or perceived police misconduct. Neighborhoods with high crime rates tend to have problematic police-community relations. In their efforts to fight crime in these communities, police tend to categorize residents as troublemakers and act aggressively toward them. The result is that verbal and physical abuse, unjustified stops of people on the street, and corrupt activities are much more likely to occur in high crime rather than low crime areas. However, residents of neighborhoods where community policing exists might have a higher opinion of the police and may be less inclined to believe that police misconduct is widespread. In theory, community policing involves residents and police officers working together to identify problems and solutions to crime, which should foster improved relations between two parties and thus reduce the incidence of police abuse. People who live in high crime communities and who are frequently exposed to media reports on police abuse may be particularly prone to believe that police misconduct is prevalent. It is important to note that the mass media has played a part in shaping the public opinion of police misconduct. Despite other factors, repeated exposure to media reports in police abuse is one of the strongest predictors of citizens' perceptions of misconduct. People who frequently read or hear about incidents of misconduct as presented in the media are inclined to believe that misconduct is a common occurrence in both their city and their neighborhood, and such media exposure affects blacks, Hispanics, and whites alike. African Americans who live in neighborhoods perceived as having serious crime problems and who are heavily exposed to media accounts of police misconduct are especially likely to believe that police brutality is directly tied to their community as well as other parts of the city with similar demographics. According to this perspective, when media reports are consistent with objective conditions, the two may have a powerful combined effect on an individual's perceptions, greater than the effect of media exposure alone. Persons who live in high crime areas may be particularly sensitive to media reports on police misconduct because these reports identify with residents' knowledge of police misconduct in their neighborhoods. Now let's discuss some of the solutions that are being implemented. Community policing. The Violent Crime Control Act of 1994 created the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, known as COPS, within the Justice Department and authorized spending $8.8 billion over 10 years to support community policing initiatives in cities throughout the country, including hiring 100,000 officers. Cities vary considerably in the degree to which community policing actually exists and in the degree to which officers accept it. In some cities, it is marginalized in a community relations branch that operates independently of most patrol officers. In other places, however, community policing is more integrated throughout the police department and is a philosophy guiding all officers. Community policing generally refers to officers and neighborhood residents working together to identify the neighborhood conditions that lead to crime and formulating solutions to those problems. As such, it is much more collaborative and proactive than the traditional approach of responding to incidents after the fact. Community policing is accomplished through regular police community meetings, routine foot patrols, police mini stations, and are accessible to residents and various programs for youth. Officer accountability. Many Americans doubt that police departments are capable of effectively monitoring and punishing officers who have gone astray. According to a 1992 Harris poll, about 2/3 of the public felt that police were too lenient in investigating complaints against fellow officers. Americans prefer external oversight over internal review. To prevent racial profiling, for example, many states and cities now require officers to record the race, gender, and age of all motorists that they stop, as well as the reason for the stop and whether a search or arrest was made. Forcing officers to justify their actions in writing could reduce improper stops. Since such data recording requirements are recent, it is too early to assess their effects. Still, a growing number of state and local officials, as well as most citizens, believe that collecting this information will help reduce racial profiling. Another innovative tactic is to mount video cameras on the dashboards of patrol cars. When officers stop motorists, the camera records the encounter, documenting both citizen and police behavior. In 2000, the Community-Oriented Policing Services Office awarded $12 million to 41 police agencies to purchase a total of 2,900 in-car cameras. Currently, the research on whether such monitoring helps reduce racial profiling or other abuses during street stops is limited, but a substantial number of Americans believe that in-car cameras would help improve matters. Civilian oversight agencies. There is a serious lack of research on the activities and effectiveness of oversight agencies, and neither the law enforcement profession nor the new citizen oversight professional community has developed a set of professional standards for complaint procedures. A review of the literature on the effectiveness of civilian oversight of police indicates that the results of such studies vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and civilian oversight systems have a mixed record nationally. Some have performed well, others have been a complete failure. The primary objective of an external civilian oversight mechanism, such as a police review board, is to provide public accountability in the citizen complaint process by making the investigation of complaints of police misconduct and incidents involving the excessive and/or deadly use of force by police transparent and open to the public. The main purpose of citizen complaint system is meant to give a voice to the grievances of citizens. Citizen complaints against police are intended to serve as an early warning system to alert government officials and police administrators to potential problems in officer conduct, enabling administration to identify and address such problematic behavior before it reaches a critical stage. Recommendations for implementing change. Community policing has had an impact on race relations and the reduced occurrence of police misconduct in minority neighborhoods. But it has only been successful within those police departments that have embedded the ideology of community policing within the culture of all members of the department. Delegating the responsibilities to specialist and community policing units has been less effective compared to training all officers to respond to the needs of the public. What is needed is a standardized system for community policing that is developed by the Community-Oriented Policing Service, and funding for such programs shall be based on the department's compliance to nationwide policies. The policies involving community policing should be an essential element of the police academy's academic curriculum and have a level of importance similar to that of weapons training and use of force. Furthermore, this training should continue at the department level as an addition to the field training unit's requirements. Additionally, those seeking promotion must have been previously assigned to the Community Relations Unit, where such programs exist, before being considered for promotion to sergeant. Civilian oversight committees should be funded through federal grants that help to develop programs and create forms that are standard for filing complaints. City Council representatives should ensure that these committees are being implemented and staffed in their districts, and complaints are reviewed by council members as well as the mayor. Serious complaints should be brought before a board comprised of the members of the Oversight Committee, district councilmen, representatives of the mayor's office, and police chiefs and/or police commissioners in order to resolve the issues. Finally, the standards of police hiring should undergo extensive research to identify a pattern of yet unidentified characteristics of those officers and recruits who have had frequent episodes of misconduct. Identifying those individuals who have a proclivity towards violence and inappropriate on-duty behavior is essential to prove that the problem is that of individual officers and not a reflection of the department. Academy training should include scenarios that place the cadets in situations with people of color to determine if their attitudes change or if they are more prone to using force. It is important to identify racial bias within the individual officer as early as possible and provide alternate and appropriate solutions for the cadet. Thank you for your time, and this concludes this video.